What's up guys, this is Jeff from Sorta Healthy, and today we'll be talking all about this. What is this phenomenon called? What causes it, and how do you fix it with your clients or yourself for that matter? We'll be covering all of that stuff today in what I think should be a relatively easy to follow guide. Before we jump into today's content, all I ask is that you consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. This is the best way to support this channel, which is a free resource to all fitness professionals. Thank you very much for the support, everyone. I really appreciate it. So first things first, what is this called? It's called a few things: Pronation Distortion Syndrome, Pes Planus Distortion Syndrome, knock knees, and heck, there are probably a whole bunch of other names for this condition that are eluding my mind right now too. And before we go into more detail on this condition, let's cover who this video will be most useful for. This video will be useful to future trainers who are taking their NASM exams soon, because they do test you on a lot of this stuff. It will also be useful for trainers who already have clients and they're working in the field, because you see this all of the time and it's something you want to correct, or at the very least manage as best as you can to prevent injury. So real quick, let's talk anatomically about what this syndrome is defined as piece by piece. So Pes Planus means collapsed arch, aka flat feet. As you can see in this picture, people with this condition are lacking an arch in their foot. Another thing you'll see, and this is probably the most obvious one, is valgus knees, or knees that bow inward towards each other. The knees will also typically rotate inwards in this situation. At the hip, you see increased adduction, which adduction of the hip looks like this. You also typically see extra internal rotation. As a trainer, you're most likely to see all of this stuff when a client attempts a squat. Okay, so now that we've addressed what this condition is, let's go over what you can do to help fix it. And for me to recommend a strategy that helps with an issue like the ones we're discussing in today's video, it has to fit two criteria. One, it has to actually help fix the problem, and two, it has to be practical in an actual training session. Some of the strategies I've seen recommended here on YouTube could certainly be beneficial, but not too many of them seem like they would actually be practical in a typical personal training session. So when dealing with Pes Planus Distortion syndrome, there are muscles that are likely to be overactive, and there are muscles that are likely to be underactive. For most clients, the best strategy will be to loosen the overactive muscles and strengthen the underactive muscles. When it comes to the overactive muscles, we're certainly looking at the gastrocnemius and soleus, and those are your two main calf muscles. We're looking at the adductors, or the inner thigh muscles, and we're looking at the hip flexors, which live up in this area. We want to, for the most part, calm these overactive muscles down by using SMR, or self-myofascial release, as well as stretching. For the gastroc and soleus, I have a lot of luck using SMR techniques with a lacrosse ball or a foam roller. Have your client position their calf on the device and start to have them slowly roll the back of their calf out. If they feel an area that is particularly tight, have them slowly alternate between dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, taking some deep breaths while the area calms down. Spend about 1 to 3 minutes working on this before a session with clients who have this issue. I may also have them do this static stretch for about 30 seconds before their workout too. Next up, we have the hip flexors. Foam rolling these muscles can be helpful. Also, using a stretch like the half kneeling hip flexor stretch can help to reduce hip flexor tension. Both of these things can be done in the warm-up portion of a session, and both should only take a minute or two to complete. If your client feels any extra tension in a specific area we're trying to target, have them focus on that spot for a little extra time. The last area that we'll focus on loosening will be the adductors. You can have your client do the old school inner thigh stretches like I'm showing here, or you can do some foam rolling with an externally rotated hip. Make sure you roll out the full length of the adductors. Another stretch I like for the adductors and the hip flexors at the same time is the runner's lunge stretch. I'll typically have my client rotate their torso inwards as they do this for a better inner thigh stretch. Okay, so moving on to the underactive muscle portion of dealing with pronation distortion syndrome. Essentially what we want to do is strengthen these underactive muscles so they can provide more support. The main underactive muscles that we'll be focusing on are the peroneals, or anterior and posterior tibialis, and the glutes. And strengthening the glutes is pretty straightforward. I rely on bridge and hip thrust variations. Clamshells, band walks, and hip abductions are also really useful. You'll want pretty much all of this stuff in most of your clients' routines, whether they have this stuff going on or not. If they do have this distortion syndrome going on though, you'll want to include these moves at an even higher frequency. You'll probably want at least 1 or 2 exercises that target glute maximus and glute medius in every single workout. And I'll show you what that would look like soon when we go over a full workout for a client with this issue. As far as the tibialis or peroneal muscles are concerned, I typically don't isolate them too much. You'll see people here on YouTube recommending those isolation exercises for people with pronation distortion syndrome, and I think there's nothing wrong with that at all, and it could help your client achieve some good results. results. I just haven't found those exercises to be practical in actual personal training sessions. Instead, what I have clients focus on are slow and controlled compound movements that target the peroneals alongside other muscle groups at the same time. You'll want to keep these movements very light in the beginning. I either go with body weight or very light resistance until their form significantly improves. On that note, let's check out an example of a workout routine that would work well for a typical client who has pronation distortion syndrome. Okay, so now we're looking at 2 workouts with a client who has pronation distortion syndrome. This is session 1 after their consultation and assessment, and this is session number 5. We'll just pretend that sessions 2, 3, and 4 were done and follow a similar pattern to these 2. We just don't have them right here in front of us. By the way, guys, this workout chart is free for all of you to use and download. I explain it in greater detail in this video right here. I'll put a link to that down in the video description. So first things first, the warm-up. I like my clients to warm up for 5 or so minutes before their session. My warm-ups are dynamic for the most part, and the objective is to prepare the client for the upcoming workout. In session number 1, my client is doing the half kneeling hip flexor stretch for at least 30 seconds on each side, and they're doing some general SMR for the hip flexors, adductors, and calf muscles. You'll then see BW or bodyweight squats for 10 reps and 3 sets. In my experience, when you're dealing with an average client who has a postural or movement deviation that's considered less than optimal, well, most of the time the reason that movement pattern exists for them is because they're simply not moving enough. So in addition to my corrective warm-up exercises and other exercises that will help me to fix some of my clients' imbalances, I am also having my client focus on doing the movement that makes their faulty movement pattern obvious in the first place. This pattern is obvious in the squat. If you want to correct a client's squat, you will have to have them squat. Just make sure you're keeping it really light until their form gets better. So I want my clients squatting often, almost every session, unless for whatever reason I think that will cause a problem. For clients with knock knees, pronation distortion syndrome, whatever, tell them to push their knees out over their toes as they're squatting down and back. It's always a great idea to have a client practice by squatting down to a bench for a while if they're struggling. I'm also working on assisted bodyweight split squats. I say assisted because, as you can see, she's holding on to the squat rack for these. This is a great overall move that hits pretty much all the areas that my client is lacking in when it comes to strength. I also have some glute medius exercises in the mix too, and those come in the form of clamshells and lateral band walks. Now we're going to look at what a session might look like 2 weeks later after having done a few workouts. I have SMR calves, bodyweight squats with an emphasis on pushing the knees outward. We'll also say I did a static calf stretch for this client, I just couldn't fit it in here. And then we also threw some Frankensteins in there just to get the entire body moving. And I would want to spend about a minute or so doing each of these things with my client. On to the workout itself. My client was doing squats about 50% correct on day 1. 50% is a failing grade, not good. We'll say by day 5 she's at about 75%, which is obviously way better. And this is what I often see with an average client. Her form, although way better, is still not good enough to load up with too much at all. What I haven't covered over a few sessions is that her ankle mobility is lacking. And you can tell her ankle mobility is lacking because this happens when she squats. It's already gotten a little better, but we still need to improve it, hence the SMR calves and the calf stretch in the beginning. Anyways, we're loading up the squats now, but only a small amount. She's doing light goblet squats. I won't have her squat anything heavy until her form is near perfect. Some other lower body moves that we have going on are step-ups, we've got bridges, and we have some side-lying hip abductions. All of these moves will help to strengthen her weak spots. I think it's also really important to mention that the average person doesn't care whatsoever about pronation distortion syndrome. They're going to be coming in with a goal like weight loss or getting stronger, and pronation distortion syndrome, or knock knees, will just be something for you to help them with to avoid injury on their journey. So don't forget about their other exercises and just only start focusing on fixing a problem that they may not even care about. You can see with this client, I've still spent a lot of time doing upper body, pushing and pulling. We've also spent a good amount of time doing some core moves, and we've thrown in a few metabolic moves as well. Do not lose sight of a client's main goals. The key is to find small but significant ways to weave corrective strategies into your sessions. For my clients' cardio, which I have them do after their sessions, I find that uphill walking can be a really good addition to these clients' programs. This is because uphill walking is relatively low risk for most, even if they have some movement abnormalities. Uphill walking can further help to loosen up a client who has stiff ankles, or one that is lacking dorsiflexion range of motion too. And most importantly, uphill walking is something that could help them achieve their other goals, such as weight loss. So consider trying to convince your client to do some extra uphill cardio around your sessions, and if they prefer a different form of cardio, that could be useful too. The key for many will just be to get them moving more often. And that, my friends, is all that we have for today. We've covered what I think is a simple and effective way to help clients deal with this condition. An important thing to mention is that it's probably not a good thing to tell your clients that they have a condition or anything that they should worry about. As trainers, it's not our job to diagnose things. And even beyond that, pronation distortion syndrome, knock knees, or whatever you want to call it, isn't even really a condition anyways. It's just a faulty movement or postural pattern that could increase chances of injury. We want our clients to stay safe, happy, and injury-free, and that's why we try to help people with this kind of stuff. If someone is dealing with a more extreme case of this condition, or any other one for that matter, do not be afraid to refer out. In some cases, a physical therapist may be better equipped to deal with this condition. However, very often your training and help in increasing your client's physical activity will be enough to help a lot. Anyways, hopefully you all found the video helpful and practical, and if you guys have any questions on anything, make sure to let me know down below. And if you haven't already, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, because this does help the channel to grow, which does allow me to create more free content for all of you. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and until next time, stay sorta healthy.